Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. There's more information on the website womensdeclaration.com, where you will find our Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. It's been signed by 29,390 people from 175 countries and is supported by 421 organisations. We have over 100 volunteer activists, including 51 country contacts engaged in defending women's rights. We changed our name from Women's Human Rights Campaign to Women's Declaration International at the start of this year, 2022, but our goals remain the same: the protection of women and girls' sex-based rights. Feminist activism is fabulous, much better than armchair feminism, where you watch and talk and sit around on armchairs or sit. The activism is fantastic because you're more directly involved in making political change, and you have the pleasure of working with sisters who are doing things together. We really enjoy being activists for Women's Declaration International. And if anybody would like to get involved with the activism, please fill in the form on our website and get involved with us, because it's great. And it's also, you'll be helping to make political change. This week, I'm really pleased to say we have Emelie Köhler from Sweden, Dasha Stevovich from Serbia, and Lynn Chadwick from USA. Emelie is going to be talking about what the growing number of detransitioners tells us. Daša is going to tell us about an LGB shelter in Serbia. And Lynn will talk on the No Males in Women's Jails protest that she went to and reflections on that. That was in the States. We're now going to move on to Emelie Köhler. Emelie's from Sweden. She's working on supporting and raising awareness around detransition and desisting in Sweden. She's going to talk about her own experience, what she's learned from connecting other detransitioners, and what's inherently misogynistic with trans ideology. And I'll just say that I was incredibly lucky to go to a workshop that Emelie ran in Sweden a couple of years ago at a feminist summer camp, and heard her give just an incredibly moving, interesting talk. So it's really brilliant to hear from you again, Emelie, and over to you.
I'm going to start by briefly telling my own story, and then I'll move on to talk a bit more about detransition and transgenderism. I grew up being just a tomboy, and I felt very different from all the other girls. So I guess it wasn't strange that I was thinking a lot about why I was different. And then when I was 19, I spoke to a friend, and she was already within the LGBT community. So she told me, well, Emelie, have you heard about gender identity? Did you know that we're all born with an inner gender, and it might be the case that yours isn't really aligned with your body? And that's something that made a lot of sense to me back then, because I, really couldn't relate to other women and girls, especially when it came to expression-wise. So I very quickly bought into that idea and started identifying. And to not make this story too long, this was a process that lasted over 3 years, where I just I didn't have dysphoria when I started identifying. It was something that developed over time as I more and more believed that I was actually born with a male inner gender. And also, I should mention, just taking these social steps, changing name and pronoun. I think that made social situations a lot more difficult. So that definitely contributed to my just overall well-being and mental health quite drastically declining during those years. So I was always very hesitant to start to medicalize my body. I did understand that this is a big thing to do, and it's gonna impact my health. But in the end, I was doing so bad, and the only answer I could get from the situation I was in with the dysphoria and me being very convinced that there was some male sort of inner gender, well, that was that this is something I need to do, because it was hopefully gonna make my life a bit easier. So I went through the whole process of getting a diagnosis, and I moved on to get double mastectomy, and then I started on the hormone treatment, testosterone. And this is actually, well, I guess it is a bit of a coincidence. I don't know really, but this is where I started to get critical as well. And it wasn't quite that I didn't question my inner gender at first. It was that especially I got in touch with other trans person who had lived transitioned for some time. And that was in contrast to my other friends who were, well, most of my friends, they were also in the beginning of the process. But the people I met, they could give me a more realistic picture of what exactly to expect from transitioning. And they would just say a lot of things that that is not very much spoken about, like ranging from different health issues to many people ending up feeling alone despite having to transition to the gender that they identify with. And some of them were actually missing female spaces and having that experience acknowledged. So, and I should add that these people that I met, they actually weren't doing well at all. So I got assistant, and I actually moved on to look up studies, because until then I just assumed that, well, this is a treatment that is proven to work, I guess. But what I found when I started to look into the long-term follow-ups and studies that doesn't have too many dropouts, is that, well, it's actually not possible to say that this is like, yeah, this probably has, it seems to decrease the dysphoria that you experience, but you cannot expect your mental health to get better. And from my point of view, my mental health was very bad because I had dysphoria. So it didn't make any sense to me. And also what the studies could show was that the suicide rates were alarmingly high after transition. So at that point, I can say that I was in huge distress because I didn't have the courage to continue with the hormones. I dropped them. But I was still very convinced that there is a male on the inside. So what am I going to do with that situation? But what happened after that was that well, I guess during that time, speaking over a year or so, I started to question things in a way that I hadn't quite done before that. And I came eventually across a video by a detransition woman who, well, I guess I should mention that I, first of all, didn't believe in like detransitioning. I thought that might be something happening if there was something wrong with if you had medical issues or if you were pressured to it in some way. But this woman, she just, I mean, in contrast to me, she had actually lived transition for some time. So she was saying things that, well, just really breaking down the whole idea of gender identity, like how can you explain being born in the wrong body, and why don't we talk about all these gender stereotypes and norms, and what is it actually to be a woman? It's not going to lead us anywhere good if we define it as anything other than just biology. So that was really the key for me. And when I mean, I had dropped the hormones sometime before, but that's the day when I took back about myself. And so that's briefly my story. And to move on to like where I am today, I guess, is that, so this is 4 years back now. And since then I've been, well, trying to raise a voice around this. And well, I have this website, and I've also contributed in some media coverage around it. And I guess some people wonder, like, why would you're just one person who has regretted all of this. Why would you make such a big deal out of it? But the thing here is really, and I think many of you have probably already read or seen or heard other detrans stories, but I don't relate very much to the word regretter, because at that time, with the options I had, with that like framework of, I mean, I wasn't questioning whether that trans feeling was there or not, but I think it's very clear that I was introduced to an idea. That's when my dysphoria developed. I was doing worse until I saw no other options than transitioning. And then what resolved the situation for me was to just criticize the very core of this. And that's the idea of being born in the wrong body or having anything like an inner gender. Yeah, so I mean, this is that's the wrong picture that people have. I would rather call us dissidents or well, what do you say? You know what I mean? And it's controversial, but I think it's really a key to all of this. And what people don't really see with this, because I mean, the way that people talk about this is that, like, they don't understand how serious this, well, the whole, it doesn't sound too bad. Like, what's the harm in letting people having inner genders? It's really promoted as something liberating and finding your true self. And I hear some people trying to make feminist statements about it. But if you break this down and really look into what it does to people, I think, my opinion, it's, they say, be your true self by finding this feeling and identification. But what I did during these years was really starting to disassociate from my body. And they say this has nothing to do with gender norms. Like, even people get offended when you even touch that subject, relating, like, if you relate it to trans. But there I also feel like you can go to any detransitioner or trans person and ask them about how it was to grow up as a gender non-conforming person. And I think most people would say that it was difficult. Like, some of us were bullied for it. Some of us had nasty things said to us. Some of us weren't treated very well for it, because we were breaking the norms for our gender. And they also say that it has nothing to do with stereotypes. And that's just, well, what is identifying? What is it that you identify with? was, I mean, what I didn't like to think about myself was comparing myself to a very like stereotypical picture of a woman in that society provides us with lots of makeup and stuff. That's what I wanted to get away from, and that's the stereotype. And I identified with the male stereotype. So there are just lots of things that you can break down here that really isn't feminist and are actually prohibiting us from talking about really important stuff like the gender norms that we want to change. And it's also just, it's so self-centered. Like, okay, so you feel bad for being gender non-conforming. It has nothing to do with what the world is like. It's just this feeling that you were born with, and it may lead to you having to change your body. But yay, it's gonna turn out well or something. So that's what makes me really angry, frustrated when you, well, with my experience and just thinking about how much it has hurt me, and to see this ideology coming wrapped up in like with rainbows and unicorns, and even presented to children. Like, I mean, I guess that's where I feel very strongly that it wasn't easy to detransition. I mean, I actually felt like I had to leave the whole community that I had, and socially it was very stressful. And I know I could do it because I was an adult and I had the capability to think more critically. But I'm not sure what would have happened if I was a lot younger. And I do believe that the only reason that it started for me when I was 19 is because that's when it was introduced to me. But if I was 12 years old, I think it could just as well have started at that age, and it would have been more difficult to break away from it. Because when I think about all these things that I broke down with the ideology, some of these things are, like, I think, ridiculously apparent in one way, that I can't believe that most people, like people supporting this transgenderism and transitioning young people, I can't believe that they are all buying into it fully, that there really is such thing as born in the wrong body, and it has nothing to do with stereotypes and gender norms and stuff. But I think we have a big issue when it comes to the idea of what transitioning can lead to. I think we're still very influenced by all the success stories that you can find out there, because there's usually a very big focus on, well, what I usually say is like you have this honeymoon phase. Like, I think most people, and I think even studies shows this, that most people are doing better the first couple of years, but then you have the long-term not doing very well long-term, and then you have the health issues, and then some people may think more critically about it, and that may lead up to wishing that there would have been other alternatives. So, and here is where I think the whole group of detransitioners comes into the picture as well. I mean, we've seen a quite insane increase. I think it's enough to go back to like 2016, and you just wouldn't find much on the internet if you Googled. Today we have like this Reddit subgroup where you have almost 25,000 members. And I myself, I've also noticed that I didn't get in touch with very many 4 years ago, but now I do get in touch with a lot of people. And it's, you know, some people say, well, if this isn't working, if this isn't like saving people's lives, then shouldn't we get to a point where we see all transgender people detransitioning? And this is what I really want to get out there, that I don't think we're gonna reach that point, and it may very well be that there are some people transitioning that feels true that it has benefited to them. But what we do need to recognize is that it is incredibly difficult to detransition. It's many people take a long time just thinking over the decision and then finding strategies around how to handle it socially. And also we can talk about the irreversible things that you just can't fix if you go back. So to me, I can't interpret the group of detransitioners that we see now in any other way that it is actually the tip of the iceberg. So that's what needs to be recognized, to understand that transitioning isn't helping the big group. It's causing more problems than it solves. And I think
Emelie, I'm going to have to get you to stop now if you want to say one more thing, but then
I'm good. That was my finishing point. No, and just to say that if we can reach out with that message, and then I think it will be quite easy to break down the ideology, because it doesn't make sense in so many ways. Yeah.
We're going to move on now to Dasha Stevovich. She is from Serbia. She's set up an LGB shelter in Serbia, along with other people. She's the Women's Declaration International Country Contact for Serbia, member of radical feminist organization Fem Revolt, and co-founder of an LGB organization in Serbia, which is called Lesbian and Gay Solidarity Network. She's going to talk to us about the shelter and anything else that you want to. So thank you so much, Dasha, and over to you.
I'm a member of Lesbian and Gay Solidarity Network, and what I am going to be talking about today is our program called LGB Krov in Serbian, or translated to LGB Roof. This is a shelter that we have founded here in Belgrade, Serbia, that provides housing to young gays and lesbians facing homelessness, usually due to lack of parental support caused by homophobia. First of all, the organization was founded in September 2020, and LGB Roof is a program that started as soon as the organization launched. We were founded out of necessity for a different kind of LGBT organizing, due to the fact that local LGBT plus organizations that are all well-funded never even tried to combat more serious existential socioeconomic issues within the community. But they usually base their work on online presence and Pride Parade, which happens once a year. So this program of ours started first with some extensive reading on how different, usually women's shelters, but also some LGBT shelters were founded all over the world. And we found some of the most impressive stories that I have ever read. What we found is that a lot of them were actually funded by only via initiative of only several people who didn't have much resources. There are cases of lesbians opening their own home for young homeless people and so on. So what we're doing is learning from our history, that being both history of women and homosexual movement. So during the first year, the program was functioning in a more unofficial manner. We have set up a network of our own members and some close contacts, and we would handle each case much less formally than we do now, due to the fact that we didn't have much resources. This was the first cases were not as difficult as the ones we're dealing with right now are. And most of the people who turned to us for help were not necessarily homeless. They needed some sort of support, which is lacking from the community itself and the organizations, other organizations. So what we would do, depending obviously on the case, is either advice, and in some more serious cases, we would organize temporary housing or other forms of support. Let me try to say this less formally. If there were cases that were more serious, we would use our resources and have people crash at my couch or at the couch of other members of the organization. And we were actually get the whole network that we have created, use our own resources and personal contacts to create sort of a network that can handle these kind of cases. And we learned from cases themselves and changed and updated the program as we went. What we had planned since the beginning was actually having a proper space, renting an apartment that would serve as a long-term solution. And this happened now in January. In December last year, we found ourselves in a situation that we need to upgrade the program, become more serious. And now since January, we have officially have an apartment that serves as a safe place for young LGB people running away from homelessness, facing homelessness. What we also have, this is an important part, this program is not only a shelter and with food. We have several other programs that are that all aim to help the person leave this program, not back to the street, but actually having a job, having all their personal documents that they might have lost in the way, getting them professional medical or psychological help where needed, and so on, so that they can actually leave this program, which is time limited, with a somewhat stable life, with a job, with the opportunity to get their own place, and so on. Of course, the program has strict documents in place, like a house order and a contract, and all the rules and all the documents that we have designed are checked by a feminist organization with a similar program in place, the one that works with women victims of prostitution and human trafficking. And this is another important thing I would like to address, is that all the processes and this program is entirely modeled by feminist initiatives and previous initiatives that did similar things. One of the reasons this is actually possible is that we have strong contacts with other organizations dealing with either homelessness, marginalized groups, organizations working on socioeconomic issues, and feminist organizations. Everything we don't have, which is many things, we are an informal group, we can figure out by seeking help and contacts with other organizations and individuals. What we have, for example, is a program of psychological support from a close contact of ours that's offered to do pro bono work with our cases. Another member of the organization will soon go through a training for an SOS phone so that we can try and implement that into the program. And what at some point we will try to establish as well is sort of a network of either companies or employers that we can hope to hire our cases, people who go through our program. So as you can see for yourselves, this is a lot of work. It's a lot of work that has already been done, and a lot of work still to be done. One of the most important things to be done is establishing women's shelter, so like another apartment that will function as a female shelter, because for obvious reasons, for obvious principles that we were founded on, we take safeguarding very, very seriously, and we will, as soon as there is need, as soon as we actually have a case that needs to be in a female shelter, we will open another location so that we can handle that as well. As you can hear and see from everything that I've said so far, you can see that we don't really have a contact with other LGBT organizations working locally. This is due to the fact that when we were founded, when the organization was founded, one of the main issues that got us some sort of popularity since the beginning is that we are very vocal on the issues of gender identity ideology, and not only that, but prostitution surrogacy as well, which means that we're not entirely the favorite people of local initiatives, and which is also the reason that we will never get stable funding grants and actually bigger sort of funding. And that's also the reason we would never accept it, because those kind of grants and fundings usually come with a mandatory ideology, unfortunately in this case, gender identity ideology and neoliberal ideology, which is not something that we would ever accept. It goes against every principle that we have set up, which brings me to an important point. What we do right now, how we fund this entire program, is that we rely on small donations. Apart from all our membership fees, the organization is now 20 people strong. Apart from our own membership fees going directly to the fund for LGB Roof, we have set up a Patreon. I will send the link to the chat in a second. And we have figured out that this project will be in a way sustainable when we have a lot of small donations supporting this idea. And one of the reasons why we have to rely on international support from all the organizations and individuals fighting gender identity ideology is exactly the reason that we couldn't ever get any sort of proper grants or funding. This is why any share of our Patreon and our program would be much appreciated. And as well, of course, any kind of small donations starting from €3 or €5 a month means a lot to us, means that actually we can be sure that this program will become sustainable and can actually be stable and function for years.
So we're going to move to Lynn now. Lynn is Lynn Chadwick. She's from the USA. She's been involved in protests, a protest at least, against males in women's jails. And we've been talking, also quite a lot of women have been talking about possibly, or probably, or definitely, let's say, doing protests against males in women's jails. And some are already going on. And Lynn very kindly said that she would tell us about her experiences and give us some tips about how to organize these sort of protests and why it's great to do it.
The US, we're doing pretty well over here, despite our obstacles and the way that we have an absolutely enormous country, and it's difficult to get a lot of women together to protest because we have so much ground to cover. But when I was looking back in my pictures to try to organize some, I realized that I have been to 14 protests this year in the US. Yes, there was the Star Wars guy. I went to Aberdeen, interviewed him, and That was a great protest. And there was the Netflix protest. The TERF Collective was represented at Netflix. That sign, unfortunately, was stolen, and we did not recover it. Gender clinic protests are happening all over the US. I went to 7 gender clinic protests this year. This one was in New York. These were organized by the brilliant Joey Bright, who is just doing absolutely amazing boots on the ground organizing all over the US. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to participate in those. This was a prison protest that we did in the capital city of Washington State, Olympia. And so it was kind of in front of their offices there. Oh, this is Washington, D.C. at the Women's Picket protest. The WHRC, now WDI, was present there. And a lot of you are going to see yourselves in these pictures, which is really fun always, isn't it? What happened at the prison was just amazing. And it was organized by April Morrow through Sovereign Women Speak. And this was the second largest protest that I'm aware of that happened in 2021. The biggest one was the women's picket protest, but the prison protest at the Purdy prison in Washington State was the second largest protest held by feminist women in the United States last year. So April did a fabulous job of organizing. And so the reason we had such a fabulous and huge turnout for this was that there was an entire weekend set aside for women to gather, to be inspired, to do workshops, and to do this protest. So we had organizing ahead of time. We put out a press release, which was, of course, ignored by the press. Prisons are generally located in very remote locations, and the Purdy prison is one of those. For that reason, as far as protests go, prison protests tend to be pretty low risk to the women involved because nobody knows you're there and you're out in the middle of nowhere. So I think we should always be prepared for the reality that something could go wrong. But protesting in front of prisons is pretty safe. We had a training ahead of time where we talked about NVDA, nonviolent direct action, and we established ahead of time what our protocols would be together to keep us all safe. We contacted the prison. They knew we were coming. They told us where we were allowed to stand and where we were not allowed to stand. We were perfectly compliant with that. We had a party bus that brought us all there together. It was amazing. And that provided us a place to stand up high. And Kara Dansky gave an incredible speech from the top of that bus, which was just lovely. We had huge banners. The prison staff were thrilled that we were there. They thanked us for being there. They are not happy about what's happening with men being put in the prison either. But thanks to Joe Biden's executive order, they don't have a whole lot of choice in the matter. It's just being done. Yes, that's a clinic. That was a protest that happened in Phoenix. This was part of the prison protest. We gathered as well on a freeway overpass and allowed all the oncoming traffic to see our protest signs as well. But the beautiful thing was we were able to assemble across the street from the prison where the women in the prison could see us. Now, how encouraging to them. And they could see us there. We let them know that we understand that they are stuck in that vulnerable position, being locked in prison with these men, many of whom are sexual offenders. There was a woman who was raped in that prison, that very same prison, right after a male was transferred there. So they saw us. They were not allowed to come outside for their usual outside time. They were kept indoors, but they saw us, and we heard at least one of them yell, "Thank you," back to us. So that was very encouraging. Following this protest at the prison, we have been able to communicate with the women inside to encourage them, to let them know that they are not forgotten and that we know they're there and that we're trying to help, because we really are. Furthermore, I was contacted by a woman I know who is a state representative in Washington State, and she messaged me and said that she wants to present a bill in Washington State this year to say that men, biological men, are not going to be housed. There's our party bus. So my friend contacted us and said that she wanted to write this bill, and that she had contacted the Department of Corrections, and she was told by the Department of Corrections that they have not had any problems with the prisons. There have been no complaints, there have been no problems, which is absolutely not true. I was able to connect my friend to April, who was able to get more information to her. And April has now been able to meet with another local state politician. And so we've gotten on the map there in our state, which I'm really grateful for. So we know that the women know that they are seen. The women know they're being supported. Local politicians have been put on notice. A bill has been written and hundreds of letters have been received. That's absolutely true, April. So there are many organizations working in North America on this issue. Amy Ichikawa has an organization called Women to Women. Kelly Angelica has Sisters in Solidarity. Amanda Stillman in Canada has Amanda Stillman in the US has Keep Prisons Single Sex. Heather Mason is in Canada with Canadian Women's Sex-Based Rights. And April Morrow, as I said, is running Sovereign Women Speak. Now, as well, the other really exciting thing that April did is she actually hired an airplane to come and have an aerial banner that flew over the city that said, "Sovereign women demand single-sex spaces." It was absolutely breathtaking. After the protest, we gathered in the town. We stood on corners with our signs, and we went into shops and talked with shop owners individually to also let them know about it. So there was a lot of community awareness that was built as well. I would encourage women to get together to protest. It's not nearly as hard or nearly as scary as it seems when you haven't done it. It's encouraging, it's strengthening, and it's effective. So I'm just giving a shout out to all my sisters that are such fabulous organizers. And I would say everybody should just come protest. It's the best thing.